now let me invite the next speaker, Dr. Gerard Bodekar, professor from University of Oxford, England, a well-known figure and a great admirer of Ayurveda. Yesterday I listened to him in an international delegate forum. Very electrifying thoughts, encouraging for our Ayurveda community, and his thoughts will be most enlightening for us. Let us welcome Dr. Bodekar with a hand of applause.
I think the reason that I was asked to talk on this global perspective is that my colleagues and I at Oxford University produced 5 years ago now the World Health Organization Global Atlas on traditional, complementary and alternative medicine. This was commissioned by the World Health Organization and published by them to record and analyze and map the status of policy in traditional, complementary and alternative medicine around the world. Now it's a big atlas. There are 2 volumes, 1 volume of maps, 1 volume of chapters charting these trends around the world. It's a fast evolving sector, so already 5 years on, it's out of date. But it's the best we've got right now. And I want to show you a couple of maps that will tell us a story about globalization of traditional medicine, and within that, globalization of Ayurveda. This is a map of the use of herbal and traditional medicine around the world by the people of the world. And going from light green to dark green, indicating light use to high use, and in some cases just light data, we see that this is a green world. There is nothing alternative about alternative medicine. It is a global social reality. It is a socio-medical reality. When we look at what governments are doing in response to that previous map, we see that around the world again, there is legislation and policy on traditional, complementary and alternative medicine. It is becoming a formal part of healthcare around the world. We looked in at specific traditions and specific systems, and here's a map looking at the yellow of not use of, but official recognition of traditional Chinese medicine. Madam Jalaja drew attention to the great advancement of Chinese medicine. And I'd like to say there's a big difference between how Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine have globalized. The key difference is that the globalization of Chinese medicine has been a highly centralized exercise. It's been coordinated from Beijing with a regulatory backing, with a trade division, with an international agenda, with very big funds, including funding for the World Health Organization's Office of Traditional Medicine. You see how widespread with the yellow there is official recognition in some way or another of Chinese medicine. There's more yellow now, 5 years on. Britain is yellow. We have legislation in Britain authorizing the practice of acupuncture and licensing the profession of acupuncture and the profession of Chinese herbal medicine. Here is the map for Ayurveda of official recognition. Remember, this is not use. This is governments recognizing. Chinese medicine, Ayurveda. So you can see that through systematic, centralized, coordinated government-to-government work, China has made great headway. The globalization of Ayurveda has been led largely not by a centralized effort from government, but by corporations who have gone out, and Ayurvedic doctors who have gone out, and movements that have gone out, taking the message of Ayurveda to the world, which is commendable, and we are very appreciative of this. But because it has not been led by government, there has not been this regulatory agenda, and that's why you see the difference in these maps. And that's the starting point of our conversation about the globalization of Ayurveda. So the first thing to close gaps in Ayurvedic globalization agenda, several priorities will need to be addressed. My colleagues on the dais have already been talking about some key ones here. But the first thing to really formalize a home for Ayurveda, not just popularize, but formalize, and there's a big difference, is for focused exchanges with government regulatory agencies in countries where Ayurveda is growing in popularity, to ensure that just as traditional Chinese medicine practitioners are licensed as healthcare professionals, similarly Ayurvedic physicians and therapists are also eligible for such official status within regional and national healthcare around the world, including licensure for the products that they have to be able to perform their clinical work. Another area that will help this is the establishment of World Health Organization collaborating centers on Ayurveda. Currently, here is a list of the WHO collaborating centers on Asian traditional medicine. There are 7 WHO collaborating centers on traditional Chinese medicine within China itself. There is 1 WHO collaborating center in Melbourne, in Australia at RMIT, on traditional Chinese medicine. There are 2 centers on Oriental medicine in South Korea, 1 WHO collaborating center in Pyongyang in North Korea, 1 in Hanoi in Vietnam, 2 WHO collaborating centers in Japan, and all of these systems derive from traditional Chinese medicine, as is acknowledged by the countries themselves. In fact, Kampo medicine in Japan, anyone heard of Kampo medicine? Yes, a few hands are going up. The word Kampo in Japanese means Chinese. So the Japanese are very honest calling their traditional medicine Chinese medicine. So there are a total of 14 World Health Organization collaborating centers on East Asian medicine derived from Chinese medicine. Sadly, there are no World Health Organization collaborating centers on Ayurveda or any other Indian systems of medicine. Do you like that? I don't think so. So this is something that has to be a priority to redress the balance in India, but just as China has done in the wider Ayurvedic family of Asia, the Ayurvedic diaspora of Asia, which we will talk about. In the global move towards integrated medicine, the combination of modern and traditional or complementary medicine with a patient-centered focus and an evidence base, one of the key things that will be necessary to have Ayurveda take a place in integrative medicine is evidence on herb-drug interactions. We have this for many, many popular Western herbs, how they interact with leading pharmaceutical drugs that people may be taking, but we don't have this for Ayurveda. And I said in the international forum the day before yesterday, this is a natural thing for Jammu to take up, the Jammu Institute for Integrative Medicine, with their long track record on safety issues, on pharmacology development, and their status as an FDA accredited research institute. Here's an example. Anybody know this plant? Any hands up? Hypericum, St. John's wort. Yes, some hands are going up. This is used in Western herbal medicine to treat mild to moderate depression. In Old English herbal traditions, it was used to treat melancholy. Melancholy is mild to moderate depression in today's language. Clinical studies show that it is as effective as tricyclic antidepressants in treating mild to moderate depression with none of the same side effects. It is also completely non-toxic. There is no toxicity. However, it does interact with pharmacological drugs. The contraceptive pill is one. So if a woman is on the contraceptive pill and is also mildly depressed, and she takes hypericum, St. John's wort, she is at some risk of becoming pregnant. It also interacts with antiretroviral drugs. So if somebody is HIV positive and is on antiretroviral drugs, and, not surprisingly, possibly depressed, and they take St. John's wort, it will turn off the mechanism of action of their antiretroviral drugs and their viral load will soar. It's not toxic, but it does interact with other drugs. So herb-drug interaction is extremely important, and doctors need to know this, and they need to have a compendium of this information or to tap onto an Ayurvedic herb-drug interaction website at their desk so they can answer any questions. If the patient says, well, doc, what about my statins and my warfarin and whatever else? They can say, well, here's the information on what I've recommended for you. Then another dimension that has to be addressed in the globalization of Ayurveda is this area of public health. In this community, so many Ayurvedic doctors, so many Ayurvedic product companies, so many Ayurvedic researchers, we tend to focus on the clinical level, on the patient. But public health is about communities and about society. Public health is about taking the message of what works for an individual and benefiting the whole community. And again, Madam Jalaja has referred to this in her introductory remarks, of the importance of taking Ayurveda out to those who need it on a large-scale basis. And to this end, what we need is not just some well-intentioned efforts here and there. We need an agenda. We need a roadmap. We need to know where we're going in public health with Ayurveda. WHO already has a roadmap in public health. It includes major infectious and communicable diseases, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, degenerative and lifestyle diseases, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, the metabolic syndrome, mental health. These are all WHO priorities. Why should we invent our own? These should become part of the Ayurvedic agenda for public health. Also, India's own agenda for public health, safe water, safe motherhood. These all should be part of the agenda for Ayurveda and addressed in a systematic way. And I would say, as a public health researcher myself, these should not only be addressed as a public health agenda, they should be evaluated through public health research to look at the public health outcomes of these interventions. Otherwise, it's just goodwill and talk. Without evidence, there is no proof and there is no systemic policy change. I'd like to give you an example of a public health intervention here in Bangalore, Karnataka, and in many neighboring states, done by the Institute for Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine here in Bangalore, FRLHT, on whose governing council I'm privileged to sit. They simply developed a medicinal plant program for families. Very simple program, 6,000 villages, 150,000 families, and this was a pilot study. I'm always impressed by the scale that constitutes a pilot study in India. 150,000 units in any other part of the world would be considered a large-scale trial, but this was just a pilot. And what they did was they selected about 20 medicinal plants, but region-specific. So the plants of the northeast were different to the plants used in the Western Ghat region, and different to the plants used in the northwest, and so on. But 20 or so plants known locally to be effective against common ailments: cough, cold, fever, cuts, headaches, minor gynecological problems, and so on, discharge. These are the things that families go to the local dispensary or the local market to buy a small number of medicines to manage. When we looked into the research, the health economic research for India, we found that among the rural poor of India, the third highest area of family expenditure is on medicines. Food, shelter, medicines. Not food, shelter, school books, school fees, school uniforms, transportation. Food, shelter, medicine. The third highest area of expenditure for the rural poor. If you can reduce expenditure on medicines, you are impacting poverty. That is a public health intervention. This is one of the 6,000 resource workers, all women appointed through women's groups, who were trained in developing these home herbal gardens, who in turn trained women in the families to grow these plants, to prepare them, to use them for the selected conditions. You can see just a few plants growing by the wall of this little house. Nothing very glamorous in terms of garden landscaping, but a collection of important home medicines. Here's what came out of it. First thing is that the study found that the program was adopted by the poorest of the poor. It benefited mainly women and children in poor communities for common ailments. The families who didn't adopt the home herbal garden program were found to have an expenditure on family medicines that was 5 times higher than the families who had the home herbal gardens. That was a reduction of 80% in the money that these home herbal garden families were spending on medicines every week, every month. 80% reduction. That is 80% of that money on medicines now available for kids' education, whatever else the family wants. The women themselves, who were the resource workers, were making 500 rupees a month in addition to their other income, so it was income generation for rural women. And that raises a question. I learned the other day in Delhi, talking with senior directors of a leading hospital group, that there's a forecast that India needs 75,000 new hospital beds every year. I was shocked. 75,000 new beds a year. I said, based on what? They said, well, based on current morbidity figures. I said, so the presumption is that India is not going to prevent anything. The presumption is that India doesn't know how to reverse any health problems. The presumption is that Indians are going to get sicker and sicker and need more and more hospital beds. Well, I would say to the World Ayurveda Congress, there's your challenge. If a simple study like this can reduce health expenditures and improve health status of the rural poor to this extent, do they really need 75,000 new beds a year? Or is that a business vote that says we want to build more hospitals, whereas the health sector should be saying we want to create a disease-free society? We should not need those beds. Here's a simple solution. That is a public health strategy, ladies and gentlemen. We've done more on this in our book on public health, policy and public health perspectives of traditional medicine. There is a chapter written by my colleagues from IAM on the Home Herbal Garden project, if anyone's interested in looking at this further, published by Imperial College Press in 2007. I want to move also to Ayurveda and wellness. I don't believe that Ayurveda has grasped the scope of the wellness movement worldwide. Stanford Research Institute in America did a study in 2008 using data from 2007, and they valued the global wellness industry at over $1 trillion in just that 1 year. You've all heard about the problems in Europe with the banks failing, following America, with Ireland having to be bailed out, Greece having to be bailed out. Do you know how big that bailout fund is? $1 trillion. People are spending more than $1 trillion on wellness at the same time as banks are being bailed out for a little less than that. That's how big and how important that is to the world's population. The spa component of that was assessed at $254 billion in value in 2007. The global golfing industry in the same year was $80 billion. The motion picture industry was $27 billion. You can see how important wellness activities are to the people of the world. I think it's important for Ayurveda to understand this, not to compromise or become cute in how Ayurveda is presented, but to recognize this trend and recognize that of all the traditional medical systems in the world, and I say that in consideration of Chinese medicine, which I know well, and the other Asian medical systems, Ayurveda is the most comprehensive in addressing issues of lifestyle and wellness. If Ayurveda doesn't catch this wave, it's missing the point of what's happening in the 21st century. Swasthya is health in Ayurveda. Swasthya, established in the self, is a wellness conceptualization of health. Bala, strength, vitality, is a wellness conceptualization of health. And I think it's important for Ayurveda to focus in on this wellness track and develop a language and a body of evidence and a range of programs to address this as well. One important part of this is Ayurvedic nutrition. We don't know enough about this. We don't hear enough about this. How many of you have heard of the Mediterranean diet? Yes? Anybody at the back, you heard of the Mediterranean diet? One lady has. Well done. I think a lot more have. The Mediterranean, front row has too. The Mediterranean diet has been found to reduce cardiovascular risk and to reduce the risk of cancer. What is it? It's steamed foods, it's salads, it's olive oil, and so on. Now, I ask you, you go into a rural village in India and say to people, well, you should be having steamed skinless chicken and fresh lettuce and lots of olive oil. Some people are laughing, and that's what the villagers would do if you went in and told them that. Why isn't there research on Ayurvedic nutrition and heart disease prevention and cancer prevention and diabetes prevention and reversal? This, I would say, is an important part of the wellness, lifestyle, and indeed public health contribution that is waiting to be done in Ayurveda. I mentioned spas. The word spa is from the acronym Salus per Aquam, health through water. Well, Ayurveda is really much more about oil. Spo doesn't sound quite as good as spa, sanus per oleum. But if you see the bottom line there on the screen, you see this quote from Charaka, who talks about the value of oil. The body of one who uses oil massage regularly does not become affected much, even if subjected to accidental injuries or strenuous work. By using oil massage daily, a person is endowed with pleasant touch, trim body parts, and becomes strong, charming, and least affected by old age. Well, isn't that a very nice bit of insight? We should all be doing daily abhyangas, and we should be telling the world about the value of this as part of wellness. Where is the evidence? We need research on this as well. Again, for more information, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm telling you about all my own books. I'm not selling them though, so this is not a marketing exercise, but just for your information, we produced a book on understanding the global spa industry, and there's a section there on traditionally themed spas if anyone's interested in learning more. And then there's education. As part of this globalization agenda, we need to focus on courses for doctors and health professionals, and I was very happy, Madam Jalaja, to learn from Dr. Sharma's talk the other day that there's now standardized curriculum that WHO has lent its stamp to for Ayurvedic courses for doctors and Ayurvedic students. Ayurveda also needs to be taught in medical schools. I've run courses in Ayurveda, introductory courses in Ayurveda at the Oxford Medical School for Oxford University students, and one day I had a visit from the Health Minister of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a department, a ministry of Ayurveda, not just a department, and he saw this book on Ayurveda on my desk and he said, "What's this?" And that's the Sri Lankans over there. And he said, "What is this for?" I said, "This is a text I use when I do an introductory course on Ayurveda for our medical students." He said, "You teach Ayurveda to the Oxford medical students?" I said, "Just an introductory course." He said, "We have a ministry of Ayurveda in Sri Lanka, and I can't get our doctors to have even an introductory lecture on Ayurveda for our medical students. Please come and talk to our doctors," which I did. Then there's Ayurveda in spa management courses and Ayurveda to the public. And this is a point that I think, again, we're missing in Ayurveda. The embassies for Ayurveda are out there, and they are called yoga centers. They exist in every small town, in every country in the West. Grannies go along to do it, kids do it, pregnant ladies do it. Yoga is India's greatest traditional brand around the world. Linking Ayurveda to yoga is an obvious thing to do, offering training courses for yoga teachers just to educate about Ayurveda, not prescribe, not treat, but just educate, would be a wonderful bridge to the world of Ayurveda, and I think this needs to be developed. Then there's theoretical and foundational research, which I don't need to dwell on. Dr. Valiatan is a great leader in this. His protege and brilliant researcher, Professor Bhushan Patwardhan, has been doing research on the genetic basis of the Tridosha theory. What he's found is that when the Ayurvedic doctors group people into a Vata dosha group, a Pitta dosha group, a Kapha dosha group, and he looks at their genetic makeup, that there are 3 discrete clusterings of genetic material reflecting the Ayurvedic diagnostic categories. This is what in Western medical science we would call pharmacogenetics. Ayurveda has it. What we need to do is take this further and show how this Ayurvedic pharmacogenetics can guide on an individualized approach to prescribing and drug development. Further research on the theoretical constructs of Ayurveda, the energy basis of Ayurveda, prana, nadis, marma, the physics of Ayurveda, which Professor Alex Hankey has done some important theoretical conceptualization work in. The physics of Ayurveda is something that Ayurveda can offer to modern medical science, which forgets about physics and starts with chemistry. Chemistry doesn't tell the whole story. Physics doesn't go away just because you talk about chemistry. The laws of physics prevail, and Ayurveda understands how if you shift energy, matter complies and lines up and follows. This is something of foundational importance in medical science. And guiding this is the need for textual research and the conservation of classical texts. And I know there's a movement for this in India. IAM is doing work in this, others are doing work in this. But as well as doing science, Ayurveda has the great gift of being able to ground the science in Shastra. Shastra-guided research will be the best of modern science and the best of Vedic science. And I want to finally talk with you about the Ayurvedic family when we talk about globalization. When Ayurveda talks about globalization, I hear from government officials, I hear from companies, I hear from traveling Vaidyas, America and Europe. I showed you that list of collaborating centers of Chinese medicine. What do you see? 14 collaborating centers in East Asia. China looks to its own wider family for expansion and development. It looks globally as well, as we saw from the map, but it's developing its own family. A diaspora, do you know that word? It comes from the Greek, which means a scattering of seeds. Now you can scatter stones and they lie on the ground. If you scatter seeds, they grow. And this is what has happened through Indian trade and exploration and settlement in Southeast Asia over at least 2,000 years and more. The seeds are out there, they've been sown. Let's take a look at them. Here's some South Indian influence on the Malay Peninsula. There's a state in Malaysia. Are the Malaysians here? Where are the Malaysians? I know there's a delegation. Yes, I see hands going up there at the back. The state of Kedah was in ancient times known as Kedaram. Have you heard of Kedarnath? Kedarnath, everybody's heard of Kedarnath? Well, this was Kedaram. Now it's just Kedah, but it was an ancient settlement that was a trading entrepot, a port between India and China, where the trade winds would take people. They'd stop till the monsoons changed, and they set up a settlement. It was known as a settlement of high culture, of civilization that produced silk and gold, not cotton and clay, silk and gold. This is a temple ruin that remains from that in the state of Kedah, north of Penang, showing some of the Vedic influence. This was a Shaivite community, and on the hill at the back there was a permanent flame burning for several hundred years that served as a lighthouse for ships coming in and also as a flame in the Agnihoma traditions of the community. I don't have to tell many of you what this is. This is the yoni for a Shivaling in that temple foundation that I showed you. And there's the Shivaling in the museum in Kedah that was set up by the Sultan, the Malay Sultan of Kedah, whose ancestors were these Hindu Buddhist Rajas of Kedah. And he's proud of his ancestry and has set up this museum. Here's another thing from the museum, Ganapati. As you can see, a very old style of carving. And here's some of the Buddhist influence, Gandharan style carving and seals. And here are some of the students from local college who are recording their early history, and it's part of their education. They're proud of their heritage. But in the hills in the background you can see there's dense vegetation, and the local forestry research unit has found this is unique vegetation. It's different to the vegetation of Kedah. Why? There was a settlement there. Settlers took plants. What plants did they take? They took food crops and they took medicinal crops because they needed medicines. There's a research opportunity here. It's not a randomized controlled clinical trial. It's archaeobotany. It's looking at the ancient plants that are still surviving that would have been planted as medicinal gardens by these early settlers up to 2 millennia ago as evidence for an Ayurvedic influence and presence. Here's another plug. This is a book my colleagues and I published last year in Malaysia. on Malaysian health traditions, the traditions of Ramuan of Malaysia, which was launched by the Queen of Malaysia in July of last year. In Indonesia, there was a similar influence. Borobudur was a great Buddhist center. That's Borobudur in Indonesia, the largest Buddhist center in the world. My time is out and my talk is just about up to. This is Borobudur. And these are the traditions that are now there in Indonesia, the massage traditions, the herbal traditions that have strong links with Ayurveda. They're linguistic links showing not just an Indian influence but an Ayurvedic influence. Panchalogam in Malay and Indonesian means an alloy, but it draws from the Siddha term of Pancha, 5 metals in Siddha medicine. Pancha Indra is the Malay and Indonesian word for 5 senses. Pancha Indra has strong links with Pancha Mahabhutas. Nadi in the Malay dictionary is the word for pulse. We know what Nadi means in Ayurveda, Nadi Vigyan. Same in Thailand and Laos. Thai massage comes from Indian yoga. Burmese medicine, they talk about dat, which comes from dhatus, the tissues. This is your Ayurvedic family, your Ayurvedic diaspora. Thai and Burmese Buddhist monks still have this knowledge. Vietnam, as you can see, this is not a Chinese influence. This is an Indian influence. So throughout, there is this Ayurvedic influence that is waiting to be nurtured. I'll go straight to the end. The Vedic globalization, as I said, should be done in the spirit of Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The world is our family, not the world is an opportunity for a quick buck. We do this, obviously businesses want to profit and should profit, but Ayurveda is offering meaning and connectedness and enhancement for human life, and that's done in the spirit of caring and family. And this is my last slide. I'd like to propose a new public health outlook for Ayurvedic development, which at the moment is still seems to be a kind of secret way of thinking, so I've called it SHH. A focus on society rather than exclusively on individuals. A recognition of the importance of service, not only profit. Profit, yes, of course, but not only profit, service. A focus on systems that take into account consumer priorities, what the public are interested in, not just what we want to give them. A focus on sustainability in healthcare, like the home herbal gardens, like conserving medicinal plants, and a focus on health for the majority of the world's populations who use traditional medicine, drawing on the rich insights from Ayurveda. That, I think, will help us with Ayurvedic globalization. Thank you very much.